This is going to be a pretty light demo. Um, and let's just think about sort of a kind of a silly scenario. Um, I'm going to add a server.js file, even though this is not really going to be an app. And I'm going to create two files here. Actually, let's do this. npm init. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, well, we'll start out by just reading from this file. Let me kill this. I don't need my Postgres anymore. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go, we've actually done this before, but in a different context. I'm going to bring in my FS, which is going to allow me to read. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say fs read file. And I'm going to give it an absolute path. Path dot join directory name package.json. Right, this is asynchronous. And what I end up getting here is either an error or a result. And I'm going to go over here and say console.log result to string. All right, I don't expect an error here. That file should exist. And if I go over here and I say nodemon, since I have it installed globally, server.js, it should end up reading this file. Okay, interesting. Not all that great, but kind of interesting. Let's just take an example and we'll say modify.add, and I'll put in my text.txt. And I'll go over here and I'll say foobar baz. And I'm going to go back to my server file, and I'm going to go and actually read this. Now, when I go ahead and do that, this should give me these two files. Now, let's say that I wanted to go and read both these files and maybe do something with the results. Okay? Let's actually modify this a little bit. We'll say my text. We'll call this foobar baz. And let's make sure that that still works. Cannot read to string of undefined. And that's probably, let's just see. So let's actually go and we're going to make this fizz buzz. We'll go over here and modify add fizz buzz.txt. And let's try this out. So fizz buzz txt and yes, thank you. So here we'll do this. And now we're back in business. Now let's say that we wanted to do something when both of these files ended up getting read. Okay? Well, I mean, one thing we could do is we could go over here and we could say let results equals result to string. Let's say we just wanted to count the words in both these files. Could split it on a space, right? 2 words, okay? And let's go over here and we will take this, put it in here. And we'll go over here and we'll get this. And once we end up getting the results here, we'll take our results and say results equals results dot concat result to string split by a space. Kind of a silly example, but let's just see what we get. And we'll say results dot length. Should have what? 5, right? Okay. Now that's fine, but let's say we really didn't care about what the order was of these things. We sort of wanted to run them at the same time. We could do it with callbacks, but it's a little bit tricky. Promises provide a way to do this, okay? We could also make other cases and say, hey, look, what if there is an error reading one of the files? How do we want to end up handling that? That sort of thing. Again, we're not really dealing with errors. I'm just going to show you one aspect of promises and show you a promise library. So one thing we could do is that there is a promise library, although ES6 has some support for promises. It's not the greatest support. There's a library that ends up commonly getting used. We're going to see in the workshop. npm install Bluebird. Going to save it. And I'm going to go back over here. And I'm going to bring in const. And I'll say promise equals require Bluebird. So now I'm going to use this promise library. And what I'm going to do here is that instead of just going in and reading these files, let's try to think about another way that we could go about this. So I'm going to create a const here, and I'll call this read fizzbuzz. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this code here, and when I end up going to read fizzbuzz, what I'm going to do is that when I end up going to this library, so this promise library, what it allows me to do is, and I'm going to comment this out because I'm going to do something a little bit different here. What this allows me to do is to say, hey, look, when I go to read fizzbuzz, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return a new promise. Now, what does that look like, a new promise? What happens when I end up creating a new promise, what I end up actually passing to this library, and again, this depends on the implementation of the library. Some libraries are different, but what it's saying is, hey, look, this is going to be something that's going to happen in the future. And it's up to you to decide whether to resolve or to reject it. So again, this is not my library. This is the promise library that Bluebird has. And instead of making this asynchronous, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here. And I'm going to take this code. And when I go to read this file, what I'm going to do is if I end up getting the results of this file, I'm going to go over here and say, hey, look, you know what? If you have an error, I'm going to, again, want to get out of there. And I'll say, just get out of there, return, and I'm going to call reject with the error. Okay? So again, what happens here is that when I use this library says, hey, look, give me a function, and I'm going to pass you 2 functions. Okay? You decide when you're done, and you're going to determine whether or not you have a success or you have a failure. If I have a failure, I'm going to reject. If I have a success, what I'm going to do is I'll go over here, and I'll say resolve, and I'll resolve my result to string. So what does this allow me to do? So now if I end up doing this, I can say read FizzBuzz, okay? And I can call it, and what I end up getting back is this promise, okay? You know a promise because a promise has one important method. The method that a promise has is a method called then, okay? Then will end up getting called when your promise has successfully been resolved. And so what I could do here, I could name this whatever I want to name it. If I say text, and I could go over here and I could say console.log my text. Okay? So if I go over here and I run this, missing after argument list, yes, because this is a function. I do this all the time. I gotta get used to my ES6 a little bit too. Huh? Line 10, yes, thank you. That too. Thanks. So let's see. Missing after argument list, line 11. Let's see. This matches with this. This is a promise. File.read, and this is my callback. So this concludes that. I think. Let's just see if that's the case. And here, this also is a function. Now that should go away, and I was able to go and read this file. Let me just show you one other thing. I could do this multiple times. All right? Again, it's just reading the file multiple times. Now, the thing that becomes interesting about this is that I could do the same thing over here. And I could say this is going to be read foobar baz. And I'll go over here and I'll say foo bar baz. So I could put these things separately. And I should get FizzBuzz and foobar baz. Just notice something. Console.log hello. When do you think hello is going to show up? Before these two or after these two? Right? Which is going to show up first? This text from FizzBuzz or this one from foobar baz? Who knows? Not in control of that. Okay? So one thing that you can do here, which is kind of interesting, is let's say, just for the sake of argument, I'll show you something kind of cool, that there was some dependency on these two files. You wanted to read one after the other. What's kind of neat about that is that inside of a then, things are chainable. Meaning, one of the things you could do is I could do a return here and say, read foobar baz. So I could say console.log text. And then I could go over here and get the text here. Notice right off the bat, no more nesting. Okay? Again, what's going to happen here is that this is a promise. It might take some time to get resolved. When it's resolved at some point in the future, this will end up getting called. Okay? Then there's another promise, and this will end up getting called. So now I'm at the same spot I was. By the way, what if for some reason there's an error? So we'll go over here, and in FizzBuzz, we'll go over here and do a file that doesn't exist. Don't see anything. Okay? In fact, it says you have an unhandled rejection. Okay, we didn't handle it. It's up to us to handle it. So we could go over here And how do we handle it? Well, we could put a catch. And here we could say console.log error. So now we're handling the error. We could see what the error is. Okay? So one thing that promises allow you to do is to chain your code so you don't have things nesting one after the other. But let's just sort of think about this for a second. Let's say we couldn't care less about what the order of reading these files were. Okay? Promises allow you to do something else. So the Bluebird library has a method called all. The all says, hey, look, give me all your promises, whatever they are, your tired promises, give them to me. Read FizzBuzz. Okay, again, read FizzBuzz is a promise. It returns a promise. Okay? Read foo bar baz. Read those two things. And then when you're done with both of them, okay, it doesn't do it serially. When you're done with both of them, you're going to get a result. What do you think that result looks like? Let's say console.log result. It's an array. If I go up here, let me fix this. So this, by the way, if I ran this now, it's never going to make it in here, right? Because I've got an error. Again, when you have a promise, okay, someone's going to have to resolve or reject that promise. If that promise is not resolved, that next then is never going to run. Okay? So now if I go to do this, again, unhandled, but let's go back up here. And this is going to allow me to do something like this. I'm going to get my values, and that would allow me to do something like what I was trying to do before, which is, how about words equals, let's say, results. Want to use reduce? Reduce is nice. So we're going to get our words. What are we going to do? We're going to have a memo. We're going to have some words here. We'll start with an empty array. And we'll go over here and we'll say memo equals memo.concat. And we'll say words.split at a space. So this should give us a collection of words, and we want to return our memo. So if we said console.log memo, words, we should see all our words together. No. Results not defined. Hold on. Not results. Yeah, let's call that results. And now we've got all of our words. By the way, I'll show you something kind of cool here. You could have a promise chain and just return this. And now we're going to have another then, and I'll call this words. And I could go over here and say console.log words.length. 5 words. Okay? Or make it more interesting. Return words.length. Okay? So again, when you end up returning something from a then, if it's not a promise, it just gets passed down the chain. Okay? How does this all work? You're going to find out. You know how? One of the workshops we're going to do is you're going to be building your own promise library. So you're going to understand what the mechanics are of this, how this promise library works. Okay? The workshop is more of practical promises where you're going to read one file after the other or read one file first. But again, this gives you the ability to then go over here. And I'm going to go over here, and this is going to be what? If I was going to name this count console.log count. Right? And again, if we wanted to make this fancy, could even go over here and say, hey, look, we're going to read the package.json. And I could go over here and say package.json. And then if I went over here, I could add this to my promise chain. And I'll get a lot more words that are coming back here. So again, this was sort of a quick demo of sort of seeing the Bluebird library, using it in, again, the situation where you don't really care about what the order is, that things end up getting completed. Let me save this. Stop this.